Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Open Cloud Management and Orchestration 2015, Adoption and Experiences. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Dan Twing, President and COO at Enterprise Management Associates. Dan joined EMA in 2005 and has over 25 years of experience in information systems, software development, and technology outsourcing. And before I go ahead and turn things over to Dan, I did want today's audience to know that Dan will be concluding his presentation by taking your questions, so do feel free to log those at any time throughout the course of the presentation by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow that will include the on-demand playback as well as some additional resources. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Dan Twing. Dan?
Thank you, Raleigh. Hello, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking our sponsors. Today we have, they helped us fund the research and sponsor this webinar. That would be HP and IBM. Our agenda for today is a quick review of the findings from the research. There's a full report available that would go into much more depth than we can do here in this format. But we're going to look at a quick introduction to cloud orchestration and how we define that in the survey. Then we're going to look at cloud and cloud orchestration adoption, how folks are looking at some of these open source orchestrators. The survey then did a drill down into OpenStack. We knew even when we launched this that OpenStack was sort of taking off as the predominant tool for orchestration in the cloud. And so we had a section of the survey specifically go into OpenStack by those who have implemented it, looking at some of the benefits and challenges. And then we'll wrap up with some summary points. Before I jump into that, let's quickly talk about the methodology that was used. We surveyed 153 respondents in North America. Represents a lot of different business verticals, some of the primary ones being healthcare, manufacturing, finance, but it covered the spectrum of industries out there. The survey was conducted in Q4 of 2014. These were limited to people who had both cloud deployed and either had a cloud orchestrator running or planned to have one running within 12 months. And these are individuals who had knowledge of their cloud environments, management of their cloud, and how their organization was impacted by using the cloud. So first, let's talk about orchestration. The term comes really from the study of music. You know, how are instruments coordinated and arranged in a given piece of music? That term has been applied to IT often. In an IT context, orchestration is really that automation of tasks involved with managing and coordinating complex software and services. In a cloud environment, that complexity really increases. We have, on-prem environments. We have our own on-prem private clouds, public clouds, hybrid clouds. So there's a lot more things that might need to be orchestrated than if you were not operating in the cloud. For the survey specifically, respondents were coached on what our definition of cloud orchestration so that we could get responses, with everybody using a common definition. And so for the survey, we specifically defined cloud orchestration as a platform that automates the configuration, coordination, and management of public and private cloud infrastructure. This can include storage, network, performance, and provisioning, as well as automating workflows required for service delivery. And so hopefully our respondents kept that definition in mind as they answered the questions, some of which we're going to review now. So we started by asking what their experience or adoption with cloud was, and this was done in two parts. What are you currently doing and what are you planning to do? And the planning horizon for this was 12 months. And then we asked specifically about public, private, and hybrid, the public being blue here, the private being green, and the hybrid being the orange color. And we asked, running across this, what % of your workloads are running in each of these environments? So you can see that private cloud and public and hybrid really all sort of spike around that 25 to 30%. And what we see there is in the neighborhood of about 20% of individuals are running about that 25 to 30% of their workloads in public and private, and about 15% are running in 30% of their workloads in hybrid. And you can see how that flows out. There's a rare few that are running 100% in private cloud, much larger than either public or hybrid. And then if you look to the right side of the screen, you see the planning horizon. When I look at that data, you really just see it sort of flattening out. So the wave is moving out. So now that spike around 20-25% has declined some because you see people maturing and moving out to 30 to 40%, 50 to 60%. And we do see an increase in those running 100%, not really in their public cloud, but private increases some, and hybrid really seems to increase the most. Looking at all of this data, what we see is that public is increasing by about 16%, private is increasing about 17%, but it's hybrid where the real growth is happening, and that's increasing by about 40%. And I think as folks have gotten more comfortable with cloud, they're getting more comfortable with moving those workloads, between public and private, and even bursting some things. So their use of hybrid has been increasing. And that's a good backdrop for why you would need orchestration. So this next data point, we asked, how successful have you been with your cloud implementation? And you can see that 78% were either very or extremely successful. Only a handful really felt that they weren't successful. We then asked, have you deployed a cloud orchestrator? Again, thinking back to that definition of how we defined it. We see that about 30% are currently using some form of cloud orchestration, and then you see plans over 6, 12, and 13 months. We see that an increase in folks that are looking at adding orchestration to their environments. This is one point where I'd like to drill down a little bit. The report has a lot more of this kind of analysis, but for this presentation, I've highlighted just a few places where we'll take a more granular look at the data. On adoption, this is a view based on company size, and we have companies under 1,000 employees in a small category, 1,000 to under 5,000 as mid-sized, and 5,000 employees and plus I've categorized as large organizations. And you can see more large organizations have deployed, 45% in this case, have deployed some form of cloud orchestration. Only around 30% of the small and mid-sized. However, you can see the small and mid-sized are planning in the next 6 and 12 months. So they definitely see the value and are making plans to move in that direction. And we see an increase as well, across the whole spectrum in large organizations. Within 12 months, a majority will be deployed. We also looked at that same data point through the lens of how successful were you with your cloud deployment. So here the blue is the extremely successful, the green the very successful, and the orange the not very successful. And you can see that those that have deployed some form of cloud orchestration are more successful than those who have not. So they feel better about their cloud environments, I would say, because the cloud orchestration has allowed them to be more effective in how they operate those environments. And they've had a better experience with cloud because they have orchestration than those who don't have orchestration are more likely to feel not very successful with their cloud environments. Continuing to look at cloud adoption, we also looked then at what cloud orchestrators have been deployed. And this slide combines data from several questions. Which cloud orchestrator have you deployed? If you've deployed one, which ones will you add to your environment? That's the green. And if you haven't deployed one at all, what are you evaluating? Because remember, everyone in the study at this point has plans to add orchestration at some point. So if you haven't done one at all, who are you evaluating? That's the orange. The slide's rank ordered by the most mentioned currently deployed, and you can see that the most mentioned with this group of respondents was IBM Cloud Manager with OpenStack, followed by IBM Cloud Orchestrator. And then we see VMware, both the vCloud and their recently announced, or within the last year, their VIOS, so their version with OpenStack, and CloudStack and others. So what's interesting to me about this slide is if you look just at the orange, who's evaluating, and this view doesn't highlight this, but I'll highlight it for you. The top three that are being planned are the IBM Cloud Manager with OpenStack, VMware's VIOS, and HP Helion with OpenStack. So all three of the top being evaluated are OpenStack versions, and that fulfilled what we expected, which is that OpenStack is sort of the wave here of where folks are looking. And I've cut that data here to combine all of the OpenStack variants, all distributions, whether they're commercial branded distributions or open distributions, comparing to the commercial variants of orchestrators, and then the other open ones that would include CloudStack or Flexient and some of the others. And you can see that currently deployed, the OpenStack variants are really right on par with the commercial variants. Those who already deployed the green but are planning to deploy others, there's a slight edge for the commercial variants, but you can see on what are you evaluating if you haven't deployed one at all. And it's predominantly or largely the OpenStack variants. And what's interesting, as I pointed out on the slide before this, that the top three of the OpenStack variants are all the commercial distributions, the IBM, the VMware, and the HP. So there's a clear predominance of folks looking to these commercially packaged distributions versus some of the other distributions. But we see deployment across all of them. So looking a little further at all of the OpenStack variants now, whether that be all of the open source variants, whether that's OpenStack or some of the other open source orchestrators, we asked, what benefits do you expect to get? Cost-effective IT ops management being, the top of the list. Additional, automation and speed, really, if you look at those top three responses. It really comes down to flexibility and speed and really managing cost better. We also asked if these open cloud technologies have an impact on innovation within the organization. And so we first asked, do you feel there's a benefit to innovation compared to commercial cloud software? And 89% answered yes, 30% yes always, and 59% yes if the organization can support them. And we followed that up with, why do you believe that? Why do you think you're going to get increased innovation? And you can see they were only allowed to answer one response here. So, open APIs and better security is at the top of the list, customizability. Interestingly, the community contributions, I would have expected to be much higher in this data. They were ranked very low. So from here, we focus specifically, on workloads. What workloads are you running on these open source clouds? And you can see that email servers and web servers are the most deployed, being the blue part of these bars, and the green part being plans for the next 12 months. But you'll see deployment across, many different kinds of production workloads, custom software, ERP, CRM, VDI systems. Folks are using it across the board. And then if you look at where is the growth, you can see that there's CRM systems and dev test and VDI have predominant plans to be moved into open cloud type environments. And then we ask, similar to that question, where are your workloads running in the cloud? What workloads are you running on these open source cloud environments? And you can see that as a percent, it really runs from that 11% of workloads up to about 50% of workloads. You see 15, 18% of organizations running somewhere, in that range. A handful running as many as 100% of their workloads in these environments. When we look at the 12-month planning horizon, you can see that wave sort of moving out and organizations pushing more and more workloads into these environments. So at this point, we focus specifically on OpenStack, being that it's the predominant open source cloud orchestrator. And we asked which components of OpenStack were in use. And while there are other components of OpenStack that were released at the time of the study, we focused on the ones that had been out long enough that there would be some experience with them. And you can see that Nova and Keystone are the most deployed at this point. But you can see, folks have plans. Neutron is probably the most planned, along with Trove, over the next 12 months to be added in terms of the components that they're using. Then we looked at what hypervisors are they running their OpenStack environments on. And here I've chosen just to show you the view, again, that's broken out by small, medium, and large organizations, because I think it's more interesting than just which hypervisors in general. But you can see from this that vSphere and Hyper-V are the most deployed. And if I showed you this data, without looking at company size, those two would stand out as the most deployed. And they are the most deployed, particularly with the large organizations. And you can see that the smaller organizations are leaning a bit in the area of KVM and RHEL, which is not surprising. So then we looked at other environments that are being used with OpenStack. And you can see both OpenShift and Cloudify are quite common, along with Cloud Foundry. But folks are using a lot of different PaaS environments and other environments with OpenStack. So now we move into really what's your experience with OpenStack, and we started with what's most important value that you find in OpenStack. And here, folks were only allowed to answer one option. Security and performance just jumped off that list, with scalability, kind of right behind them. And there's an interesting theme that you'll see develop here with the sort of security and performance, because then we asked, what needs to be improved in OpenStack in order for you to put more workloads on OpenStack? And you can see that security, again, tops the list. Here you can tell by the percentages that folks were allowed to select all that applied to them. But security, right at the top, improved high availability, and better integration with management tools are the top three that were listed here. And this theme of integration with management tools, I think, is an area that needs to be worked on both by the community developing OpenStack, and I think that's another reason why you see a lot of folks moving in the direction of the commercial distributions, because they're doing work in that area, at least with respect to their individual management tools. Then we asked what's the most challenging part of managing OpenStack. And here again, folks were only allowed to answer one, and security by a long shot. So it's the highest value, it needs the most improvement, and it's the most challenging. That's kind of interesting, I think, in terms of the experience people have with OpenStack to date. And finally, we asked, and again, there's a lot more information in the full report, but I chose to drill down in one area, which is OpenStack's impact on Amazon Web Services. So we first asked, how important is OpenStack support of Amazon's APIs? And you can see that 77% said important or very important. So clearly there's a desire to have integration with public cloud if you're deployed in Amazon currently. However, we also asked, are you planning to decrease spending on Amazon by shifting workloads to OpenStack? And here you can see that 72% do have plans, 27% immediately, 45% in the next 12 months, to shift workloads away from AWS to their OpenStack environments. And I think having these sort of automation tools really opens the door to have a more robust operation in your own private cloud. And I think that's what we're seeing here. So some of the takeaway points that I found from the data that I've presented here, and again, there's additional conclusions in the full report, but really as cloud matures, we're seeing more and more workloads being placed in the cloud, and the higher growth areas are the private and with the hybrid specifically growing the fastest. Cloud orchestration is rapidly becoming the norm. We have more use currently by large organizations, but we do see a lot of near-term plans by the mid and smaller firms, so that the majority of cloud environments are going to be run with orchestration in the next 12 months. OpenStack specifically is on its way to becoming sort of the standard, I would say, certainly for open source orchestration, but I think it's going to really challenge some of the commercial as well, although remember that many of the OpenStack deployments are using commercially prepared distributions of OpenStack. And here we get into that concept that security and performance, they are considered an important value of OpenStack, but they're also where they're most concerned about those same issues. Users really want to see more security, more high availability before they put more workloads into OpenStack, and they look at security and reliability as being the biggest challenges to manage it. And finally, this idea that AWS APIs are important, but also there seems to be a desire to shift workloads away from AWS once they have an OpenStack environment that they can operate on. So they still want that integration, but they will be moving some workloads back to their own environment. So with that, I will turn it over to Raleigh for the Q&A session.
Great, thank you, Dan. The report is also available on the EMA website, so I encourage you to check that out. You can just go to enterprisemanagement.com/research, and you can access the report there. I'll also include a link to the full report as well as a summary in that email that is going out tomorrow. We have time for a couple questions, Dan, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. The first question is, why do you think that those who felt successful with cloud were also more likely to be using cloud orchestration?
Well, that's an interesting point, and there's correlation and there's causation in the data. I mean, those 2 points are highly correlated. We actually debated the causation internally. I looked at it from two viewpoints, especially if you look at the fact that many who were planning to deploy and hadn't yet deployed orchestration were still felt successful. You could look at it from the viewpoint that if you've had a good experience with the cloud, you're looking to extend that experience, and you're open to the idea of an open source tool to do that, and that you desire orchestration because you've had success and you want to continue to put more workloads in and have more success, certainly having the orchestration is going to make you have a better experience with your cloud. So, which came first? I mean, did they deploy orchestration and then felt better about their cloud, or were they more inclined to move towards orchestration because they already felt successful with their cloud? We debated that a lot internally, and I think it's some of both. I think, certainly those who had a good cloud experience want to extend that experience, and they know if they do, they're going to need more automation and more control of that environment. But I definitely think that those who had orchestration running in any form, open or commercial, were more likely to have a good cloud experience.
Great, thank you for that insight. Another question that came in is, it seems like most of those evaluating OpenStack are looking at commercial distributions of OpenStack. Why do you think people are looking there instead of other distributions?
I think they're packaged better. It's going to be more integrated with some of the management tools, which has definitely been highlighted as a weakness currently in OpenStack, is that there isn't a high level of integration yet with some other management tools. And I think some of the commercial distributions are closing some of those gaps. They're packaging it up better. There's more support. There's data I didn't have time to put into this webinar that's in the report, where we asked about resources. What are you going to do to fulfill your implementation of OpenStack? Where are you going to find those skill sets? And on the deployment side, there was a lot of focus on getting those resources from consultants and from some of the vendors. And even once it's up and running, how are you going to run it over time? There's still a predominance, less so, on outside resources. So there's a little more training for the long term, but a lot of reliance on outside resources to get up and running. And I think certainly if you've got a relationship, if you're familiar with some of the big commercial software providers, you're using a lot of their tools in your environment, it's just safer to take their distribution, which is better packaged, and know that you can lean on their resources to help you get it up and running. And I think that's definitely why we see a trend there. And again, if you had access to the full report, you would see other data points that sort of support that.
Excellent, thank you. And I wanted to thank our audience for joining us today. As I mentioned at the beginning of the event, you will be receiving a follow-up email from EMA tomorrow. It will include the on-demand playback and links to the full report and summary, so I hope that you'll check that out. Thanks again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.